Kia ora, good morning and happy Saturday to all of you. Welcome to the fifth and final installment of your mini Not an MBA Live in Lockdown series. It's great to have you guys back here today. Kudos for showing up on a Saturday morning. That is fantastic. It doesn't really feel any different to any other day of the week, does it? I said to my daughter when I put her to bed last night, "It's Saturday tomorrow," and then thought, so it does get a little bit Groundhog Day when we're experiencing weekends in lockdown. But I would encourage all of you to do something a little bit different today to mark that it's Saturday, even though it doesn't feel any different in many respects. You don't have to work today. So if you were thinking about it, just catching up on a few things, don't. Because as soon as we start crossing those boundaries into, it's all a bit the same, we get ourselves into trouble. So I would encourage you not to work today and to do something for you. Now, I don't know what the weather is like where you are. In Wellington, it is raining again. So there won't be a lot of outside behaviour happening. Although we did go for a walk in the rain yesterday, which was quite enjoyable and not something I do a lot. I'm not running at the moment, but over the last few years, I have been a runner and I've always enjoyed running in the rain. But for some reason, I have a mental block about walking in the rain. But we did that yesterday and it was quite lovely. So, I guess we can walk out there. But look, it's a day to relax, read a book, talk to some friends, do whatever you need to do. And if you have showed up here on LinkedIn on a Saturday morning, well, that does make you a bit of a nerd, but also good stuff. Just get off here after this, please. All right, everyone. I've got some comments. What if I could barely work all week because of all the bloody other people in the house and I need Saturday to catch up? Look, I'll allow it, but I want you to time box it, Jane. And I would also like for you to make sure that you take your Sunday if that's the case. Now, Sundays, I don't know about your house, Jane, but in my house are generally the preparation day. So it's kind of a rip-off for the weekend, isn't it? Because it's the day that I do, I'd order the groceries, I clean the house, I think about what's happening for the week, I meal prep. But, there doesn't really need to be that much prep for a week in lockdown. So maybe Sunday can finally be reclaimed rather than being the precursor to Monday. Now, Ed is doing care calls today, and I would love to know what care calls constitute. Is that you reaching out to friends, family, and colleagues, Ed, to check in that they're okay? If so, that sounds like a magnificent use of a Saturday in lockdown. Well done, team. All right, so this is part 5, and remember in part 1, we talked about flexibility. How do we stay able to respond to change and disruption as it continues to rage around us? In part 2, we talked about decisions. What is it that makes a good decision? How do we make one? In part 3, we talked about systems. How do we see how things fit together, which is really important. And in part 4, which was yesterday, we talked about how to get shit done, which, as we discovered, performance is not necessarily about this caricature of a busy, harangued leader barking orders and moving from one thing to another and running on very little sleep. But it's actually about our ability to be very focused and clear about what it is that makes the most difference in our work and in our life, and to direct as much energy as possible there. So we're now closing by talking about influence, and I really like this conversation because, much like some of the other things that we have talked about this week, I think this is often misconstrued. And I don't think it's what we think it is. We live in the age of the Instagram influencer, where every man and his dog, or rather every young chick in her workout gear is an influencer these days. It's actually a job title, I believe, that you can now have. What do you do? I'm an influencer. Cool. Okay. Good for you. But what is an influencer? And I think that maybe we've got our perception a bit off, and it would be easy to think that an influencer is, the Kim Kardashian Instagram models of the world who post doctored and attractive pictures of their lifestyle and promote brands. And, Kim Kardashian famously gets $500,000 per Instagram post. And I don't think any of us would be turning that down. But also what's really interesting about that from a marketing perspective is that the age of the massive influencer in terms of millions of followers, promoted products, is waning a bit from a marketing outcome perspective. And what we're starting to see now is the rise of the micro influencer. So the micro influencer isn't someone that's got 10 million followers. They might be someone that's got 1,000 followers. And what we see from those influencers is that the quality of engagement in terms of comments and interactions with different posts, survey responses, that kind of thing, is significantly higher as a proportion than those who have the millions and millions of followers. And what tends to happen with these micro influencers, and you could probably name a few in the chat, is that they've got a very specific niche and they're trusted by the people it is that they're trying to reach for the thing that they know, right? And so the micro influencer is someone whose opinion is trusted and sought after, right? Who has the power to influence people's decisions. And I think that's really important from a work context, because if you are in a leadership role in any capacity, isn't that exactly what you want? Don't you want to be influencing the way people make decisions and the way that they behave? Now, Dan Pink wrote a brilliant book a few years ago called To Sell is Human. And in that, he posits that a lot of us are quite resistant to the concept of sales. We don't think of ourselves as salespeople. In fact, for some people, they think sales are a bit grimy and slimy. They would avoid being described as a salesperson. But what Dan says in his book is that actually that's really off, and that the average person spends at least 40% of their day selling. All right. So if they're not selling a product or a service, they're selling themselves or they're selling an idea. And so if we reject our role as salespeople or influencers, we're already on the back foot, because leadership isn't just about getting good shit done. It's getting good shit done through the power of others. And if you don't have the skills and abilities to mobilize people to think differently and to behave differently, you're in big trouble. And the data isn't pretty here, right? The data tells us that actually, on average, only about 5% of leaders have the power to change behavior. Just let that sink in for a minute. And of all the people who are in leadership roles in your community, in your organization, in your team, 1 in 20 actually have the skills and the power to change people's behavior. And that's a massive concern, because it doesn't matter how good your thinking is, or how good your idea or your project or your program or your organizational transformation initiative or whatever it is. It doesn't matter how good that is if people don't buy in and change their behavior accordingly, right? It's kind of a waste of time, right? Your idea dies, because all changes people change. And until all of us are replaced by robots, that's going to stay the same, right? For some time yet. Change requires people to be on board. And if you can't do that, you're in trouble. But the good news is that you don't need to be really popular, really charismatic, really extroverted, or have a huge following in order to be an influencer, right? So as the shift from the Kim Kardashians to the micro influencers shows us in the marketing space, actually it's not about numbers, right? It's not about reach, it's about quality. So there's some amazing research. What is her name? I know I do this every time. I'll have to put it in the comments. Some amazing research that came out a few years ago about the 3.5% rule. So this research was looking at social and political change, and it was examining civil uprisings across history to see if there was a tipping point for conversion, where if you can get a certain percentage of the population on board and actively participating in social change, how many people does it take to actually overthrow a regime or create significant social or political change? Do you know what the number is? Do you know what proportion of the population you need to have engaged to create massive change? It's 3.5%. Right? It's called the 3.5% rule. And if you spread it across history, across all of our most significant social and political uprisings, the rule stands. 3.5% of the population is all that's needed to create massive change. It's not that we need a massive following. It's that we need a highly engaged, active, and quality following. And that's not about numbers. So for those of you who've come along to this influence discussion this morning and are automatically concerned because you're like, oh, I don't want to be popular. I don't know how to be popular. I don't want to have thousands of people knowing who I am. You don't have to. That's not how it works, right? But what you do need is to be able to give your ideas the space to grow through others and your change the opportunity to be implemented through others. And that requires having a core set of people that you have the power to change their ideas and behavior. Yeah. Now, what's really interesting about the 5% of leaders who do have the power to do that, right? The 1 in 20 who do seem to be able to nail it, is that when we look at how they spend their time, it becomes very clear that it's not an accident, right? And so I think a misperception of an influential leader or an influential person might be that they have a certain personality or they have a certain set of characteristics that lend themselves to being influential. And the caricature for that would be a very articulate and charismatic, outgoing person who everybody likes. Right? This is the person they were probably popular at high school. I mean, put in the comments if you were popular at high school, but I certainly bloody wasn't. I was a naughty kid. I was an outcast. I hung out with the rat bags. We were hanging out behind the bus bay, smoking cigarettes and bunking classes. And actually, the last high school I went to in the South Island, the group of kids that I hung out with, the ragtag group that we couldn't even walk through the main canteen area at school without getting hassled and having food pelted at us. Like, that's how much of an outcast I was. I was a naughty kid, man. I was just rocking to school with the wrong shoes on and a cigarette rolled behind my ear, like, you know. And so I certainly wasn't popular at high school. And that level of, promise it's not COVID, it's just a bad cough. That level of popularity is what we kind of assume, you know, that the jock, the first five, the popular girl, and that actually doesn't play out. And for those of you who were nerds and outcasts at high school, you might have been encouraged by an older, wiser person in your life with something to that effect, you know. Don't worry, popularity doesn't matter in the real world. It doesn't matter once you get to university. Those kids aren't the ones that achieve the most success in life. And they're kind of right. Yeah, so all of those characteristics that we attribute to really popular people are not actually what makes the difference when it comes to being someone who has an impact in the world. So the 1 in 20 that do, have that influence, here's what sets them apart from everybody else. They spend at least half of their time thinking about and actively pursuing that impact. I'll let that sink in for a minute. When they're at work, they're spending at least half of their time thinking about how to get people on board or actively participating or taking action toward getting people on board. It doesn't happen by accident. It's not an inherent personality trait that makes you an influential person or an influential leader. It's intention. It's thinking about it and making it happen, because it doesn't happen by accident. And this shouldn't be a surprise. None of the important relationships and connections in your life have happened by accident. They've needed nurturing. They've needed intention. Relationships and friendships die without commitment and intention and nurturing. If you don't spend any time with people, and you're not thinking about how to be a good friend or a good mum or a good partner, it doesn't just happen. And the same is true at work. So if you're wondering why you don't have a big following, how much of your time are you spending intentionally creating space to build relationships? How much time are you spending thinking about why you need people on board, why they should care, and how you're going to reach them? Now, any of you on the call who are comms people will know this to be true, because what tends to happen is very clever other parts of the business dream up these grand ideas and get ready and have implementation plans, and then they come along to comms and they go, "Oh, we need a comms plan. We need you guys to get people on board, make a poster or put it on the internet or whatever." Right? It's an afterthought. But the 5% of leaders who do manage to really get people on board are the people who are thinking about that impact from the very beginning. It's not an afterthought. They're not tacking on a comms plan at the end. They're beginning, right at the beginning stages, at the inception of their idea. They're thinking, why should people care about this? What kind of behavior change do I need to see? How am I going to make that possible? In fact, before they have an agenda, they're spending their work life thinking, what are the important relationships that are going to be important to me here? How am I going to cultivate trust and reputation and credibility? How am I going to nurture connection right from the very beginning? But not all influence is created equal. Now, here's an interesting story, actually. I went to some Zoom drinks last night. Welcome to put in the comments if you also were spending your Friday night having a glass of wine on Zoom. I went to some Zoom drinks last night, and as you know, I have been streaming this live every day. This is day 5. And what we did differently this time that we haven't done before, based only on a new feature that's available in the software that we stream, is rather than just going live to LinkedIn, which I usually do, we multi-streamed it. So it's also been going live to Facebook, and I didn't think much about that. I don't really spend much time on Facebook, particularly from a professional capacity. My network has always been really clearly LinkedIn. But we hit the Facebook button as well because we thought, well, why not? Doing it anyway, it might as well go there. And I had a friend say to me on Zoom drinks last night, "Oh, I stuck around and watched your live this week." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." He said, "Yeah," and I felt like I couldn't leave because there was only 2 people watching. And I went, "What? 2 people watching? No, I've had really good uptake for this week." And I went, were you watching it on Facebook?" He said, yeah. And I went, "Oh, okay, no, don't panic. My fans don't live there. Right, the people that follow me and come to this stuff are predominantly on LinkedIn. I had plenty of people." And he went, "Oh, that's good. I was feeling real sorry for you." So I was like, oh, which was a bit sad because then I felt like I had to prove that I wasn't just shouting into the ether. But what's really interesting about that is I haven't invested in Facebook as a platform for my business or for my thought leadership. And mostly because we've been quite clear from the outset about who we are trying to reach in my practice, and the kind of the persona of the target client or follower that we would be reaching tends to be professionals. They tend to be ambitious and self-motivated professionals, and they tend to be people who are frustrated. So if I had to typify for you my typical student or follower or client, it would be an ambitious professional who's frustrated by how things are done. And that's been true in my practice right from the outset, regardless of the kind of work I'm doing. So if I'm doing strategic planning or leadership work, they're people who are annoyed at the pace of change or know something's broken and they want to do something differently, and they're itching to do that. If I'm thinking about the academy or some of the public courses I run, they're people who are frustrated by what's available and they're looking for something fresh, a different approach. And so they come to me, right? Because regardless of what I'm offering, that's kind of who I reach. And LinkedIn is the perfect platform for that for me, isn't it? Because it's a professional setting. And they're people who are ambitious and self-oriented, self-motivated enough to be actively participating on the platform, right? So they're not just going to work and doing their job. They're like, I want to read cool articles and get fresh insights and grow my own network, which naturally leads them to LinkedIn. And then out of the people who are there, the ones who appreciate a bit of a cheeky take or a bit of a fresh take on things are the ones who follow me and engage with my stuff. Right? So that's you right now. You're an ambitious, frustrated professional, and comment in the comments if I've described you incorrectly. But that's who we're targeting, right? That's who I need to reach. That's my market. And so LinkedIn makes sense. And we've deeply invested in LinkedIn as a platform. I'm here all the time. I really love the quality of conversation that I get here. And when I'm writing content and I'm posting and I'm doing videos and I'm thinking about the programs I design, you are who I've got in mind. And so when I popped up on Facebook as a random voice with 2 people watching and I didn't have the uptake, does that mean that I'm not, that I don't have any influence? That what I'm doing isn't worth doing or that it's not working? No. It means that's a platform I haven't spent a lot of time in. By the way, if you're currently watching on Facebook, Soz, glad to have you here. Love you very much. Right? And so the point in there is around intention, but it's saying it's not that you need to reach everyone and that not all relationships are created equally for you. Depending on what you're trying to achieve and who you need to get there and who you need to reach should be dictating where you put your energy in, right? So when you sit down to map your network and think about who you need on board, it's not that you need to be mates with everyone. And this is an important point. You don't need to join the social club. If you're on the social club, that's cool, good for you. But I couldn't think of anything bloody worse than playing social indoor netball and signing a morning tea card for Susan's baby, right? Ugh, I have no desire to do that. And that's not what you have to do. You don't have to be out there front and center at everything in order to have the kind of impact that you want to have at work. You have to identify who your people are and then think about why they should care, how you can help them, and what you need them to do. And that doesn't happen by accident. It requires some very intentional thinking and planning. And then it requires you to make space for it. So I did a bunch of work, I think it was lockdown last year, with a policy team in government. And it was essentially a bit of a influence for policy people 101 session. And actually on that note, one of my favorite books from early in my career is a Michael Wintram book called People Skills for Policy Analysts. I don't even have it on my bookshelf now. It's great. But we were having that conversation and saying, look, if you're not out there, if you're not having coffee catch-ups and participating in the right working groups and thinking about who you need to reach across the business, trying to get out there and do that at the point where you've got a new policy to launch is too late. And if you don't have a budget for it, if you don't have a time allowance for it, and if it's not considered a critical part of your work, then it's not going to happen. And so we need to change, a systems change that's actually the expectations of how we spend our time as policy people needs to change. And we need to have a whole dedicated piece in there that is relationship building and maintenance, right? So that when we need people on board, they're already there for us. So there's a whole lot of intention stuff in there that's really, really important. And I just don't think I can stress that more. If you aren't having the kind of impact you want to have, or you don't have the reputation that you want to have, how much time and effort have you put into making that possible, right? Like when I started doing this, I've been on LinkedIn for years, right? And those of you who followed me will know that. But it was actually only about 3 years ago that I was trying to reach 500 connections. Right? I was like, I can't wait till I get to 500 connections, because then it changes, doesn't it? It just says 500 plus. And there's 15,500 of you now, which is awesome. I think that's great. But also, it didn't happen by accident. It happened by showing up multiple times a week, every week, being of value, thinking about why you should care about what I've got to say and how I can be useful for you, right? And so that's what had to happen in order to get here. So it's about consistent space, consistent investment, targeted, thoughtful, intentional connection that gets you where you need to go. That's what influence is about. Not about big numbers, not about popularity, and not about accidental characteristics that you may or may not have. So if I only had to make one point today, I think that would be it. But there's a few other things in there, right? And if we continue to use my LinkedIn presence as an analogy here, if one of those key components is intention, I think there's a couple of others. And I think one of them is trust. All right, why should people trust you? What is it that you have got to say that's credible? And how are you actively building trust with people? Because trust is reciprocal, right? Are you consistent? Do you follow through on what you say you're going to do, right? Are you cultivating an environment of trust? Are you visible? All right, intention, trust, and visibility. Are you visible where you need to be visible, right? And LinkedIn's a great example for that, because I've got friends that don't use the platform very much and they just log in occasionally and they've got, I don't know, maybe the 20 people that they work with on their LinkedIn and they're like, God, Alicia, every time I open it, my whole feed is just you, right? I'm like, well, yes, but if you were following 500 people, that wouldn't be the case. But the fact is that you've got to be visible. People need to know who you are. Again, not everyone, but some people do. And so the people that you're trying to reach need to know that you exist. And you need to be walking the floor. You need to be turning up at the right working group meetings. You need to be having those conversations and coffees, because if they don't know you exist, they can't be your followers, right? And so trust, visibility, and intention are really important. Now, I think what's challenging about influence, if we think about that sales analogy, that salesperson analogy, is that we focus too much on a very external perception of what influence looks like. And we think about communication and persuasion, right? And we're going to be careful with that, because it's a very us-focused idea about what influence is. Because here's the important thing about influence. While it is about you, it's also not about you at all. Right? So let me make that point again. It's not about you. And if you're pouring all of your, let's say you've made the space, you are being intentional, but you're pouring all of your energy into thinking about, how good do my slide decks look? How compelling is my message? Right? How good do I look? How sensible is what I'm saying? That's energy wasted. Because here's the ticket. You know how you're like all worried about how you look and sound? So is everybody else, right? They're walking around thinking about their own shit and worried that they look stupid. They're giving very little thought to how you come off, right? They're all tangled up in their own shit. And so if you really want to be able to have the power, because remember, an influencer is someone who has the power to shape people's decisions and behavior. If that's what you want to be able to do, you have to direct most of your energy to thinking about them and the change you want to see in the world. And all of your behavior should be targeted to, how do I reach them, right? What do I want them to do? And how is that possible, right? What do they need to hear? Why should they care? How will this affect their life, right? Why is it worth listening to this? What is the benefit in it for them? It's not about you. And so when people get sent on, like presentation skills training, and they're trying to have really good slide packs and pretty reports, and they're delivering speeches where they never ask anybody a bloody question, or they're talking in jargon so they try and sound really smart, that's not how you have influence, right? That's not what influence looks like. It's not about communication. It's about connection and engagement, right? It is about change. And that means thinking about the people that you're reaching more than you. What is it that what are the questions they're asking? What are the problems that they're grappling with, right? If you want to roll out some kind of new technology at work, don't create a meeting called the Agile Continuous Improvement Business Change Transformation Workshop and then have people come along and deliver them a PowerPoint presentation with 8 bullet points per slide about why they should care. Like, I'm glad you've thought about why they should care, but that's not the way to get them. You know what you do? You create a meeting called Get Shit Done Faster, or We Want to Hear From You. And then when people turn up, you go, hey, what's making your life hard at the moment? And then you say, how would your life be better if you spent less time mucking around in the back end trying to get the system to work? And then they tell you, and then they care, because you've thought about them and what their needs are and trying to understand them rather than trying to convince them why they should care. And this sounds basic, but I hear it all the time. And so if I ever have to give a presentation skills workshop or advice, I'm like, every time you want to tell someone something, ask them a question, right? Why does this matter? How would your life be different if we changed it? What do you think we should do? And it's so basic to default to questions and caring, right? But remember, it's about them. And how are you going to know unless you ask? And we spend a lot of time trying to work it out, like, oh, what are people thinking? What are they Googling? How do we reach them? Let's create a persona for them. No, just ask them. People will tell you. They'll just be pleased that you give a shit. Ask people what would add value to them, what's making their life challenging, what we should do, how their life would be better if we fix that, and then reach that. And they're going to remember you. Don't panic about that. They're going to remember you as someone who actually gave a shit. So when I do have to give communications advice, my first piece of advice is always just ask more questions, right? When you stand up to give a speech, don't say, thank you everyone for coming here today. Here are 6 reasons why this is really important. Yawn, say, hey guys, how's it going? What's going on for you, right? Why do you think this matters? Because they'll tell you. It's classic sales trick, right? So communication, ask questions. And then there are 3 rules of thumb for any piece of communication. If you are thinking about how you show up, if you've got a meeting or a presentation coming up and you've dialed into this because you're like, I need to have more influence and take people with me and I don't know how. 3 rules, right? And they operate as a hierarchy. Number 1, be clear, right? You don't need to be fancy. You don't need to be super compelling. You don't need to use jargon. In fact, I would prefer that you didn't. So often it's not clear what we're asking of people, right? We go on these big, long, contextual spiels about the things, and our documents are this thick and our speeches are this long, and we've got 42 slides, and people don't really know at the end like what it was about or why it mattered. If there's only one communication rule to follow, number 1, be clear. Speak in plain language, right? Because then we access processing fluency, which is where when we use language that people are familiar with, A, they trust us more, and B, they connect to it. Because there's a mechanism in our brain that goes, oh, that was easy for me to process. I'm involved. I care. I trust this person, right? It's really basic. Speak like a real person. Be clear. If you've managed to be clear, second rule, be real. You don't need to dress in a way you wouldn't usually dress. Speak in a way you wouldn't usually speak. Hide aspects of your personality that you think are unprofessional or unpalatable or uninteresting, right? Just be real. Be what you are. Because if you show up fake, there's no way you can reach other people on a real level. And that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to connect with them so they can change their behavior. Well, how are you going to do that if you show up as not being real? Be clear, be real. And if you've managed to be clear and be real, whatever that looks like for you, if you're an introvert, be quiet. If you're an extrovert, be loud. If you swear occasionally, don't panic, right? If you stutter or you stumble or you or you'll pause, most communication skills training will tell you that that's what you need to work on. No, mate, that's you. Just be happy with that. Be confident with that and focus on the people you're trying to reach, right? Be clear, be real. And thirdly, be interesting. Stop being so bloody boring. And in fact, the things that you're hiding, right, the stuff that you're putting away to put on your professional face at work is the stuff that's most interesting about you. If you spent $3,000 on Lego the last lockdown because you're a massive Lego nerd, have a Lego story as part of your presentation. People are interested in that stuff, right? If you had so my interesting one here was, when I showed up to work as a young professional, I was the first person in my family to go to university, which I mentioned a couple of days ago. And I was the first person who'd had a professional job, and I had no idea what to do, right? I was like, okay, what do I dress? And how do I speak? And, how do I be a professional? And I spent a couple of years really trying, right, to hide the fact that I was a teen mum and I had a couple of kids at home and that I was a bit of a bogan that came from like wherever and not much. And I spent a lot of time trying to create a veneer that put that away. Now, that was something that when I became self-employed, I realized very quickly was a problem. Because when you're self-employed, particularly when you're starting out, the quality of your relationships and the quality of your connection with your clients directly contributes to how well you do in business, right? And I realized that it was that stuff, the interesting backstory, the who I was as a person, the me as a mum, the me as a bit of a bogan, that was what provided the connection point, right? It was talking about that stuff, about real stuff that people found interesting and that developed true relationships. It was going out for dinner and sharing a bottle of wine and chatting about kids and places that you've lived. And that's the stuff that created me in the outset a sustainable business. And I use that now. I mean, use is the wrong word because it sounds slimy, but that is now my approach to things like LinkedIn as well. I share my life and my stories and what's going on for me in reality, because being real and being interesting is what builds relationships. And we forget this when we go to work. Like, we know this when we've got mates or when we're starting a romantic partnership. But then we go to work and we're like, oh, it's different there. I put it away. No, it's still people there The same rules still apply. Just show up to work and be a person, right? Be clear, be real, be interesting. It's not about you, it's about them. And be intentional. Create the space for this to happen in your life. And you can be an influential leader, right? There are no magic tricks involved. And if what you want to do is shape people's behavior and you want to shape people's thinking, then it's probably worth you doing a bit of thought on this. All right, in the comments, we are wrapping up. Man, this one flew by. Holy shit. I was like, oh, have I got half an hour on this? Man, I could do this all day. This flew by. Can I grab you in the comments, please? What is your key takeaway from this morning's session on influence? If you were only going to remember one thing, what would it be? And I'm loving some of the comments that are already in here. We've got Ed, and Ed, I so appreciate you showing up every day this week. I have noticed, and it is amazing. You have been one of the core crew. That asking questions is a technique in confident negotiation. I mean, totally. Like if I'm trying to sell a new client in a sales meeting, I can say, clear strategy is very important, and here are 6 reasons why. Or I can say, hey, what would it be like if we, had some clearer direction in the team? And then people say, oh, Alicia, it would make such a difference. People would show up every day and they'd know what we expected of them, and we'd stop wasting so much time going over and over the same stuff in meetings. That does sound good. And they're like, honestly, actually, I think it would really boost morale. Like people are frustrated by not having clarity from the leadership team at the moment. I'm like, yeah, that does sound great. They're like, yeah, actually, we'd probably see the results in our engagement survey, to be honest, because that's what people keep complaining about. I'm like, that's awesome. Should we do it then? There was no selling from me involved there, just asking questions about what it would be like, right? So you're absolutely right that is such a key negotiation strategy. Fake influencers stick out like a sore thumb, says Wendy. It's not about you. Totally, right? If you're filtering your photos and editing your post and trying to sound clever and like, here's a photo of me doing something really impressive, aren't I impressive? And it was so nice to go to the such and such last week where I was important and hung out with important people. Dumb. Who wants to engage with that? Not me. Oh, great comment here from Paul that trust is about integrity, right? Am I doing what I'm saying I'm going to do? Am I competent, right? So can I be trusted to deliver because I have the skills to do it? Am I a nice person, right? And there's a lot to be said for that. So the number one rule for influence is just be likable, right? And here's what's interesting about the likability thing, and I love that you've brought this up, Paul, is that people think what they value in an employer or an employee or a business partner or a collaborator at work is competence. And if you ask them why they selected that person for the job or the partnership, they'll tell you it's because of their competence. But what the research suggests is that actually likability is an awful lot more important. If you like the person, you'll hire them. If you like the person, you will trust in their competence unless proven otherwise. And if they make a mistake, and here's the really cool one, if they make a mistake, you'll chalk that up to exception. So when people like you and people trust you, they give you the benefit of the doubt. You've got a margin when you walk into the room already. And when you make a mistake, they go, oh, that's not like Alicia, because she's good. I hope she's all right. Whereas if they don't like you, they're more likely to be like useless. Alicia's useless. Right? So likability is so important. And that, again, doesn't require being popular and charismatic. Just being real and caring about other people. It's magic, isn't it? It's just being a human at work. Wendy says, give a shit. It shows when you don't. Oh, yeah. It's so obvious, eh? It's just so obvious. David's going to take away that only 5% of leaders have the ability to influence behavior. And he's like, and I'm in the other 95, man, I got work to do. Yeah, I mean, so is most people. But the first step, as Sarah's pointed out here, is just spending the time, having the intention. It doesn't happen by accident. Unless you've boxed out the time to be intentional about how you create that impact, it's not going to happen. Now, Chris is blown away by the 3.5% rule. Yeah, I will link to the research and the comments for this when we finish the live, because it's so good, right? It's so useful. We go, right, it's not a lot. It's just a really potent, engaged tribe of people who are involved with me. I don't need to reach everyone. I just need the people that I want to reach to be so involved that it creates something new and something better, that my ideas can be unleashed to have impact, to change people's behavior, right? How cool is that? Rachel's taking away, be clear, be real, be interesting, right? If you've got communication rules, be clear, make it very obvious what you're saying and what it means. Be a real person and don't be so bloody boring. Bring what you are. That is fantastic. Cam has suggested to Google your name. Yeah, what shows up? Actually, I should probably do that. What shows up when you Google your name? I actually have a constant issue with there's a Christian author in America with the same name as me, and often my books get misattributed on Goodreads to being from her. So if you Google Alicia Mackay, you will engage in some Christian literature potentially from an author in the States. So that's an interesting one. All right, you guys have been amazing for the entire week. And what I'm actually going to do with these 5 videos is I'm going to chuck them as a free course on the Alicia Mackay Academy with some worksheets and some templates that you can use. So if you want to go back and watch and quiz your knowledge and get down and dirty in that, then that will be up on the Academy in the next week. So if you haven't checked out the Academy yet, academy.aliciamackay.co.nz, you absolutely should, because there is some cool free stuff on there in the version 1. And we're going to be adding so much awesome stuff there, and I'm so excited about it. But now we've reached the end. And it is Saturday, it is the weekend. So I want you to get off LinkedIn. I want you to get off screens, and I want you to go and hang out and spend some time, because we might be in lockdown, but you should still have a weekend. I have so appreciated all of you who've come along every day this week. Your commitment has been exceptional, and I really, really value it. Thank you so much for coming along and investing your time in you. And I've loved it. This has been fantastic. So enjoy the rest of your lockdown. Have a wonderful weekend and look after yourselves and each other. Thank you so much, everyone. See you later.